My name is Kelly McDonald, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Kyndoo. And I'll be moderating today's event here with Ngozi Bell and Taj Eldridge. And we're going to be going over that. And while we're getting started, let me tell you a little bit more about StartOut. StartOut is a nonprofit organization that supports and empowers LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs and founders and their allies to really, support the economic equality that we're all looking for here in this world. So thanks to our sponsors here today of StartOut to help us have this conversation. And if you want to get more involved in StartOut, there's going to be links here in the chat. So check those out. But you can come on to StartOut if you're not already a member, sign up, donate, be a part of it, and join these events and get involved in a lot of different ways. So check that out, and you'll see that startout.org link there, right there on the channel. You can also email StartOut at info@startout.org. So thanks a lot for everyone for joining. And I think we can pretty much get started here. One of the things you're going to be able to do throughout the panel time here is you'll be able to use a Q&A function to submit your questions. The panel itself will not be moderating the questions. We do have some folks here at StartOut who are helping us do that. So feel free to put some questions in the chat, but really try to use that Q&A function. That's what we're going to be using when we get to the session, the audience question and answer portion here. And so without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists today. We're going to provide valuable advice on how to strategically build and maintain relationships with VCs, angels, and other investors throughout a startup's life cycle. And so first and foremost, we have Ngozi Bell. Ngozi's a partner at Trans-Sahara Investment Corporation. Hi, Ngozi. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it today. And hi, Taj.
And we have Taj Ahmad Eldridge. She's a partner at Include Venture Partners. And my friend Alex told me to make sure I say, hey, settle down now over there on our site. I think you know Alex Nemec over at Domo. So excited to have you. So so tell me, how are you today, Taj?
I'm doing fantastically well. I'm in Southern California now, so all of my Los Angeles folks, thank you. We have this beautiful sunshine. But yes, originally from Texas, and I've been a proud supporter of what StartOut has been doing. We had a pitch competition at Lacey. I used to be at Lacey last year. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Excellent. Great. Well, I'd love to do is hand it off to both of you folks to talk a little bit more about your background and how you got to become a VC in here. And I know both of you have really interesting stories as I've met with you previously and I got to hear them. So Ngozi, maybe you can start and tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll move to Taj.
Oh, absolutely. So again, my name is Ngozi Bell.
Ngozi, I apologize.
Ngozi Bell. I'm originally from Nigeria, West Africa, and I studied physics. And I'll tell you just a quick story about studying physics. So I wanted to do medicine. A lot of times Nigerians want their kids to do certain courses. So I wanted to study medicine, and I did not make the cutoff. There's a test that we do that's called JAM. It's sort of like the SAT, but a little bit more intense. So I didn't make this cutoff, and I made my second choice, which was architecture. So my mother said to me, as a woman, she said, you can go do architecture, but she said, in the future, having a core science, she's a scientist herself, she studied chemistry. She said, if you do core science, it will broaden your horizon. So she said, go do physics. She said, as a woman, go study physics. Well, I listened to my mother and I decided to study physics. And I tell you, honestly, it was one of the best decisions I ever made because it gave me the foundation to go into electrical engineering. And it also just opened up these doors to people who somewhat kind of thought I was smart just because I studied physics. And it gave me an opportunity to sort of go into the biological sciences, to go into the physical sciences and all kinds of platforms. So the first thing is obey your mom.
Always good advice.
That's what I studied. So physics and then electrical engineering. I started off in AT&T Microelectronics, AT&T Bell Labs, working on semiconductor engineering for over 18 years. So just many years of hardcore engineering background. And then I got to an organization called Kaufman. I'm sure many of you know the Kaufman Foundation. So through the Kaufman process, I got into the VC environment. I matched through a process out of California, actually, and started working with a company called Birchmere Ventures. And then, this was the time when President Obama had just become president, and we were all excited and great things were happening and the world was turning inside out and all that kind of stuff. So I was invited to be an appointee for the administration. So I was like, I'm going. So I did. I worked on regulations on small businesses for about 6 years. And then after that, came out of the Obama administration and then joined 3 men in a private equity firm that is called Trans-Sahara, really boutique PE firm that's focused on really using technology to solve big problems. So using a lot of the novel technologies, quite honestly, IDLT, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and things like that to solve really big problems that affect lots of people. So things like, fintech, agrotech, so things that affect the everyday person. That's what really excites me, is when you can use technology to accelerate and enhance the lives of people in general. So that's what I've been doing. And then the second thing that we do is that we also focus on business development with small businesses. We help them raise funds. We help them sort of set the tone around how success can be achieved regardless of where they are in the process. Because a lot of businesses don't get the access that a few do. So that's one of the things that we try to solve. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks, Ngozi. And so, Taj, maybe you could, tell us a little bit more about you and your background. By the way, I love your hat. It's really great. Very cool.
Well, it's a bad hair day, so I had to compensate for something. But it's everything is purposeful, so you'll tend to see, if you look, there are lyrics in this hat.
Very cool.
For that. So, like Miss Bell, I listened to my mother, and my mother's Dominican, and my father's Sudanese. So you can imagine 2 immigrant parents. This is like, you're gonna go to school to be a doctor or a doctor. But I wanted to be a rapper from day one, and I was like, I'm gonna show my parents. I'm gonna go to school and study poetry and literature, and I can be a better rapper. And I go to college and satisfy them. And I guaranteed, Get Out did not release an album, but what I did have was a sense of storytelling. And I got into banking, and I was at Wells Fargo Bank for a decade in consumer banking and commercial banking. And again, that storytelling piece of it helped me through the way, because at the end of the day, we don't buy based on features. The whole idea used to say that features tell, benefits sell. So you're selling your benefits, and that's the story. And then I went to UBS Investment Bank in Beverly Hills, UBS Asset Management in Beverly Hills, working in asset management, wealth management, and then did my MBA at Pepperdine. Shout out to any Pepperdine grads out there. And then did a PhD program at Claremont in economics. So went from literature to economics, and then I was chief economist for a fund, a hedge fund, private equity fund, and that's when I started making investments as an angel investor. And I actually quit my job because I got addicted to it, and I was working at a few startups that I invested in. All of them failed. My wife was very upset with me because of those things. But then I ended up having one company that got acquired, and that started the whole interest in me getting back on the road again. And got into another company that got acquired. So I had 2 exits under my belt, and ended up being recruited by the University of California to launch their accelerator in Riverside. Shout out to folks in Riverside. And I led that accelerator and launched in 2015 to 2018. I'm proud that we've made that region in 2017 the #1 place for minority founders because of the hard work we put in. 2018, I went to Lacey, which is the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, served as Senior Director for Investment, managing the investments and everything that's in it. And then 2020, this last year, around a holiday called Juneteenth, I ended up launching a fund of funds, a $250 million fund of funds, which is include ventures. And so that's with me and 2 other partners. That Juneteenth was the Texas connection, the shout out to Texas, but also just a nod to where we need to go as a team. And we focus on Black, brown, and women-based funds that we want to invest in. So that's kind of my weird journey into venture.
That's really exciting. Congratulations on the fundraise. I know how difficult that is. So way to go. Very, 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 very cool. Definitely. Yeah. What I find interesting about both of your stories there is that there's some core fundamentals that you guys both have in there of like Taj, you know, it's really about like the storytelling and like being able to, you know, bring that all, you didn't start out as a VC. That wasn't the goal, right? Starting from poetry and going all the way to VC is a very different story. And same Ngozi of starting as in the medical physics world and becoming VC is like, there's a transformation that happened along the way to get there, very much like all of the companies that I'm sure you've invested in your day from early stage to late stage, the transformations that happen. What I'd love to talk a little bit more about then is I'm sure that, you know, starting in physics, you aren't just like running into investors every single day, right? That's not it. At some point, you also started making relationships and building it. And I think one of the things that early stage founders often lack is that they don't necessarily know investors, right? Not every company is, you know, where I am here in Silicon Valley, where you can't spit without hitting an investor, right? You're all over the country. And a lot of the folks that we see in our panel or who are here watching today are national. What are some of the ways that if a founder lacks those resources or to get introductions, Ngozi, that you would maybe recommend that they could, you know, get connected with potential investors and try to, you know, take that next step for themselves when it's not as easy as just like running into someone at a networking event? Oh, I think you're on mute there. No problem.
I think that there's something very, so there are two ways, right? There's the potential that it could be organic, and then there's also the formal way. So the formal way is, of course, you can look for a private equity firm or a venture capital firm that is aligned to your industry, right? So you can Google those and sort of follow. And many of them have information, just like we do on the website, that tells you what we're looking for and all that kind of stuff. But then there are also these organic relationships that you get because of the networks that you build, right? And what I say to a lot of people is, you know, a lot of times if we look at our ecosystem, right, if you know 10 people, those 10 people also know maybe another 10 people. So technically you have access to 100 people, right? So part of how you harness those relationships is getting yourself out there, right? It's being in communities where conversations are happening, getting on panels, talking, you know, showing up as a subject matter expert in areas that you're good at, right? Putting your own skill out there so that people want to hear from you. So what I say, you've got to almost like advertise yourself. You've got to be part of conversations. You've got to, those who know venture capitals are constantly looking for great talent. It's like now I just met a group because I'm part of this science incubator engagement that is called Westchester Bio. And from time to time, we get together, we talk about what's happening in the world, we talk about what kind of novel things are coming out in the biotech world. And many times there are VCs around those tables, there are investors around those tables. So when you come to present, somebody comes to you offline and says, hey, Ngozi, let's talk about this. I see what your group is doing. And you know, I know this kid that might be really interesting to your group. And so they introduce me to the person. And because of that, I have that conversation. So for the founder, you've got to find networks and groups that have some affinity to what you're doing. You've got to get yourself on panels. You've got to get yourself involved in a lot of the conversation. And the beautiful thing is a lot of these incubators and accelerators that are all over the country are amazing tools for you to use. And many of them are no longer rigid where, oh, you have to get into this incubator. There are many that you can just be part of the cohort, be part of the conversation, be part of the engagement, and from there you learn and you meet a ton of people. So I would say, honestly, one of the most important things is that you have to be contributing to the circles you're in, and you're invariably going to meet a lot of people who are going to be interested in you. So that's some of the organic ways that you can do that.
Yeah, great advice. I know, for example, StartOut, if you remember StartOut, you have access to the network queue in there, and there's, you know, everyone else is also trying to do something in the entrepreneurial space. So there's a lot of great mentors, connections, and advisors that you can find just from showing up to events like this or participating in those things. So I totally agree. Just finding a niche and making with it. Taj, anything you want to add to that in terms of, ways that folks can get. I know you and I talked about some really interesting stuff you're doing of like just knowing what content's there even for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of your questions talked about, Kelly, like how did I start? And I'll be honest, like me growing up, there were two ways that people had amassed wealth or was reducing the wealth gap was music and sports, right? I didn't really have a openness or understanding of the capital markets of alternative investments. And I put a book in the chat. Again, everything kind of begins and ends with a book by a guy by the name of Reginald F. Lewis, who at that time was one of the richest Black men in America. He's also a member of Kappa Alpha Psi, which I'm a member of as well. He wrote a book called Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? When I saw that title, I'm like, okay, I need to figure out what he's talking about. But when I read it, it opened me up to private equity and all sort of stuff. So I say all that to say that the pathways sometimes come in a different ways than just quantitative, right? It came from me from a literature standpoint. To add to Ms. Bell's point about the incubators and accelerators, one other tool I put into the chat is signal.nfx.com. It's a great tool to just know what investors invest in, because the worst thing you can do is reach out to an investor and you're not even in their space, nor you're too early or too late. You want to be just right and have that conversation with them. The other thing I want to mention about accelerators and incubators I think is really, really nice and really cool is if you get a chance, put your favorite artist in the chat. I want to show you the story, again, on the story side. Founders are like musicians or artists, like your favorite singer you put in the chat. Shakira, she may release albums that's for the consumer. You're a founder, you're releasing product or services for the consumer or for the business. How does Shakira get her album out? She get her album out with a record label, right? The record labels are like the venture funds. The venture funds help the founders get their product out, similar to the record label helping the artists get their stuff out. How do you hear about Shakira, right? You hear about her from radio, from Spotify, from Pandora. Those are the incubators and accelerators. They amplify the voices of founders, similar to how Spotify, similar to how radio, similar to how everything else amplifies the voice of their artists. So when you think about it like that, to Ngozi's point, you need to think about that's the way that you want to approach it as a founder. You want to approach it the same way that you looked at your favorite artist approaching the market, and really kind of find out what's the best record label to go in, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're going to, a record label that ain't doing anything, or there's misalignment, right? Like that's like you doing classical music and you going to Bad Boy Records. You want to make sure you go to the right one at the right time.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah.
Definitely. Great point in terms of like the right one at the right time. And, one thing I found often is that, you don't want to be too early, but you would definitely want to be earlier to show some of the traction and how fast you're moving. Because I think that excites a lot of investors too, of like, if you can actually execute on the work that you say you're going to do. But, a lot of times too, I think as a founder, you just don't know if somebody is, passed on you, or if they haven't responded. A lot of the advice out there is like, keep dripping on them and keep sending them, updates and whatnot. And so my question to you, Taj, is like, do you read the updates that someone sends to you that you pass? Should they keep doing that? What's the best way where it's not like, hey, I'm stalking you, but at the same time, I'm showing you what I'm getting because all I heard was a not yet versus a no, and is that okay?
Absolutely. Good question. When I was a founder, and I'm going to put my founder hat on because I wear many hats literally and figuratively. The thing that I did when I looked at investors, I kind of stalked them a little bit, and I stalked them from trying to figure out their personality. People see me here, they know my personality is very animated. You see me and know you're like, hey, I like this album. I'm going to spend some time talking with you, right? However, the whole idea with these updates is you have to figure out, when and what to give. When I was a founder, I didn't give updates on my company. That's what everybody else did. I want to do something that they remembered. So what I did is talk about the market that I'm in. I sent a note on the market. And if I was a founder in this day, right, in age, I would do the same thing, but a Medium post. All right, Medium post, LinkedIn post, all those are stuff. So I can be sure that they are seeing how I think about the market. Not just I'm pitching my company's important. No, you need to think about how's your company positioned in the market. And I think from a proximity standpoint, Kelly, some of the things you and I talked about is I automate my whole life, right? So like you may see some smoke coming up. That's my automatic diffuser. When it gets a certain humidity in here, it pokes up. I have Alexa, shut up, Alexa, stop, in here and everything else. But you could do that also with technology. There's tools like 4 Degrees that we use to serve as like a CRM. So what happens is when you get an email in, it gathers all their information. So by the time Kelly emailed me, I knew everything about her from her social media, some things that she wrote, and everything else. And then what tools like that do, they automate their process and reach back out to Kelly in a certain time frame, whether that's a monthly, whether it's quarterly. So I say all that to say, as a founder, you're going to spend the time running your business. You don't really have time to, raising money is a full-time job, which is also why you go to an accelerator, because they can help you with that. But what you want to do is try to automate as much stuff as possible, but also automate it to where you understand the person that you're automating it to. If that person likes, again, long, like for me, I put my number in the text. I'm like, text me. Like, you should know, like, you write over 160 characters, I ain't reading it. But definitely think about how that person is and what you heard them speak before. And then lastly, this is the benefit of being an accelerator. Some of your fellow founders may have already talked to the investor before, so you can get information on that end as well. So that's another benefit by being at accelerators, incubators, or even organizations like StartOut.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. And one of the things I like to do in my investor updates is I just bold all the really important parts. And I say, too long, can't read, just read the bold and you'll get the gist of the narrative itself. Ms. Bell, what do you got to say about that? Any ideas and like, what's too much? How often should I reach out to you?
Yeah, I think that, when I step back is to sort of consider both ecosystems or both worlds, right? The investor is looking at the entire array of portfolio companies and what they're trying to do, almost like, a puzzle piece, like puzzles, right? And they're trying to find what are the pieces that fit right? They're not necessarily trying to choose which one is the best. So they're not pitching you against the next person and say, oh, Kelly is better than Jane, or that's not what they're doing. They're trying to say, I'm trying to build this puzzle, what fits best for this puzzle, right? And so when you have that mindset, you also have to ask yourself, if I was sitting in their shoes, if I was doing the same thing, what would they be thinking about? So if I looked at an investor that maybe was really into the life sciences, for example, right? And they've done some stuff on biologics, they've done maybe some drug discovery, they've done some medical devices and all that, and I'll know that they're going down these verticals. So if my product fits there and my product is complementary to something they're doing, then they're going to be interested, right? So because of that, it motivates me to follow up, and I'll follow up from their place of interest, or I'll follow up from the place where I see if there is some kind of a gap, right? That puzzle is not there. So sometimes what I tell founders to do is, if you look at our portfolio, because if you go to most websites, you'll see the companies they've invested in. And if you start to see a theme, you can tell me, hey, Ngozi, you guys have this solution. My device or my product plugs into this thing very nicely. This could be very complementary to one of your portfolio companies. That immediately sparks interest in me. So when you follow up on that, and I see that, I'm going to want to have a chat with you. So my point is, also think from the perspective. So everything Taj said plus this, right? Think from the perspective of the founder and say, how am I helping them, complete their puzzle, right? What role am I playing there? And it usually will get you a conversation, and then the rest you can take to the finish line. So those are the kind of things I would do. So I never think that it's too much information to follow up, but make sure you're not following up on something that someone is unlikely to engage in, right?
Sure.
If you can see that there's such a disconnect, then you can make that decision and say, this person is probably not going to be interested anytime soon in what I'm selling. So I think you can do some of that homework yourself too.
Yeah, Ngozi, that's a really great insight. The puzzle piece part, like, really like sings it well for me. Like, I really get that. Of some of the best conversations that I've had is, they have somewhat of an interest and it kind of fits with what they're already doing. Even if it's a pass, you generally maybe can parlay that into really good advice you can actually take out of the conversation as a founder too. I think sometimes folks don't realize that maybe even the deals that you don't end up doing, you're still getting really good relationships and insights from those VCs as well there, for sure. That's great. I'd love to talk to you guys both more about, this world that we're in now with everything's being done over Zoom, or, too, on there. So how does that change in terms of the way that you see those like first meetings going? Do you guys prefer that you're just meeting and having a conversation, or do you want founders to walk you through their deck the first time? Especially because I'm guessing if you're like most investors I meet, they've already looked through my deck at least once on DocSend before they decide to take the meeting, right? So, how does that work, and what's your preferred way? And if either one of you want to take that, go for it.
I can
You want to go
start.
first?
Yeah. Okay. So for me, it's very interesting. I'm very in tuned to people, very, very in tuned, or attuned, in tune, anyway, to people. So if I start having a conversation with you, I can immediately pivot to what I'm looking for. So a lot of times, let's say it was you and I, Kelly, we came on the Zoom. And, I would expect you to, have your deck so that you can walk me through, because I think it also creates a kind of comfort zone around your knowledge base. You're the subject matter expert. You feel like you're teaching me. So I typically would say, okay, can you walk me through this? Or if I have some particular questions, I might say, but very quickly it will become a conversation, because I enjoy conversations. And part of what I'm trying to do is to understand what you actually know. Because one of the things that I find extremely important is that when you are the founder, when you came up with some widget, right, you're the subject matter expert. I want you to come in confident that I'm the student in that time. Now, I might understand the market, I must understand the sector, but I'm so curious to learn more about the product. And for some of us, because of the background we're coming to, we'll get into the nitty gritty. Be comfortable with that, right? Because the more I know, the more I understand, the more excited I get, the more likely you're going to have the next meeting. It's not guaranteeing that anything is going to, what the next steps will be, but it now invites you into my space and into the space of those that I respect, that I want to listen to this. So for me, the most important thing is just be prepared with what you know. The things you don't know, I honestly will not ding you on that. Right? You're not supposed to know. As long as you'll listen, you'll take some of that feedback, teach me something. I'm always curious. When I learn something new, I get really, really excited. So be the subject matter expert, be prepared at least with that thing, understand your market, understand your product, and then let's have a conversation. But mostly I do, sort of give that comfort zone of say, hey, walk me through your stuff. Tell me wherever you want to start, that kind of thing. So that's typically my style.
Excellent. Great. Taj?
Yeah, and I'm gonna knock down some of those questions in the live, because I think it encompasses what I'm talking about. If you recall, I gave the music analogy. I'm gonna give another music analogy. For those of us old enough and seasoned enough to remember Boyz II Men, the way Boyz II Men was founded, they walked up to New Edition, they started singing in front of them, and boom, they got a record contract, right? There's a rapper named T.I. that said, "Could Boyz II Men do that to you today?" He's like, "Hell no. What I want Boyz II Men to do to me today, instead of coming and singing to me, or giving me their CD or their rap album, I want them to show me their YouTube. I want them to show me their SoundCloud. I want them to show me their Clubhouse." The whole point is that the old days of doing business is done. The new days are you have enough free things out there in order to move forward. Somebody asked in the chat, should they hire a PR person and stuff like that early on? And my question is, look at the answer T.I. gave. There are a number of things out there that you can try to do to kind of improve your presence, right? And that's why I kind of gave these examples of Medium, of being a LinkedIn talker. And you don't have to be like, I love the Kardashians, but you don't have to be Kardashian-fied your business. You can just be yourself and be authentic in whatever you're making, and that would be what you're talking about. The other question somebody had is, the whole idea about friends and family. I don't know about a lot of people, but when I was growing up, all the things my friends and family could give me was love. It couldn't give me any funding. And so I think that, that shows the lack of diversity in this industry, by assuming that we come from places where friends and family and foods can give us money. The good thing about it, though, is there are several funds that are out there, like Precursor and others, who are what's called pre-seed funds, that were going earlier than seed. And I think that's a really great thing, too. If you're a technical founder, you're building something that's more aligned with where I used to come from, clean tech, there are several grants out there for you, like SBIR, which is funding from the federal government, which you should take a look at. There's others like, and I forgot his name, I think it's Momentum, that are like grants AI or open grants or something like that, where all they do is focus on grants and they're based in San Francisco. You can connect with them. But that's you know, how I look at ways for founders to kind of make that hurdle into getting their funding and reaching out with investors. And again, the same thing that's been mentioned here. I think what we do is not rocket science, and even though there are rocket scientists in here as the VCs in many different areas, like a couple other folks I know. But I think that at the end of the day, you have to realize that we're human and we make decisions based on data, and you want to make sure we have all the data that you need. Typically, if people ever emailed me or got a chance to email me, and Kelly may have seen this, my signature line gives you so much data. It tells you how to reach me. It tells you my Wikipedia page. It gives you articles that's been written about you. I give you all this opportunity to know up front about me. So when we talk, we're not spending time on introductions. We're getting right to it. And I'm telling you, this is what we're gonna do. This is the action item. So I would suggest that for yourself, like if you're writing articles, use Linktree. It's a free platform. Put all your articles on there. Get your Wikipedia or Everpedia page. That's another startup from the foundings of Genius. And just make sure when you're connecting with that investor, you're hitting with data while you're doing it. And absolutely right. Yeah, I don't expect for founders or for fund managers to not know every question. I actually expect you not to know some of the questions because I want to know where I can add value. Because as an investor, I want to add more value, more than just money. I want to add my experience and my network. We call it the 4 C's: capital, customers, connections, and culture.
Yeah, great point too, especially about making sure that you as a founder can give space to the venture capitalist or an angel or any investor to provide you value as well, right? Like they're coming on your team. You want to get some advice from them, and you don't need to know every answer. One thing that I think I found really helpful in my journey is having a list of asks. So when people say to you, how can I help you? Like you actually have an answer. You don't look surprised, right? That's the worst thing you want to be, a surprise that someone wants to help you. I think good investors will actually be really helpful. So yeah, let's dive into some of these questions that we have here from the audience. So May asked, you know, sometimes it feels like that promoting can feel inorganic, right? They're not the person who speaks like an influencer. I think you spoke a lot to that, Taj, with it. And I would say, you know, maybe, you know, how does someone find their authentic voice if it's not like, is every conversation good for a Clubhouse? But I think we gave some ideas on tools of using Medium, LinkedIn. I mean, there's really lots. Are there any others that we haven't really broached yet that, you know, people could get on and think of that we're missing here?
I mean, for us, because we're very technology heavy company, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's, you know, I like to see if you're writing articles, for example, there are a number of platforms that you can use to write articles. For example, there is the ResearchGate. So I read a lot of stuff from ResearchGate. In fact, when it comes to, if you're in physics or engineering, ResearchGate is a great place to publish because you'll see so many people you can collaborate with. So I tend to get a lot of stuff from there. I love Medium. I also publish on Medium. So, and I like the fact that I think what Medium does is that as a scientist, it forces you to write in a way that is interesting and captivating. So you can write about a solution from that perspective. So it's more narrative, right? More of a narrative. But I really think that at the end of the day, in terms of, because you asked a question about your authentic voice, I think you have to really be about what you're trying to achieve, right? In the sense that if you build this, if this is the widget you've built, right? Somebody needs that thing. So you need to identify who needs it. Just like you identify the customer that needs it, you must identify the investment partner that is going to appreciate that, right? Because once I find what I appreciate, I will do anything for it. So in our world, we're not as necessarily into publicity. In fact, many times you would hide your website because you're doing technology that is hard to copy. So many of our guys don't even have a website.
Sure.
They're not publishing out there. We're working very discreetly with universities. We're making sure that you have your patents. We're making sure that basically we have as much ownership rights or rights to use maybe additional technology that's required. So it's a little bit of a difference in terms of what I'm looking for. So I'm more focused on the science of what you've done. So you understanding that, you telling me that, you know, for example, we're working on a product right now. We're looking for an oncologist to try that out. So if you tell me, oh my gosh, I have 3 oncologists signed up that are testing this in these teaching universities, that immediately lights me up because somebody's validating what you're doing, right? So those are the kind of things that, so I think that's why it's also on the founder to make sure that whoever you're targeting, you're looking at what are the modes of targeting that person, right? What are the things that are important to them? Because it's not a one size fits all, right? So the way you might approach Taj will be very different from how you approach me. If you don't know that, and if you don't pivot to that, then you're going to end up with the wrong type of a match. So that's one of the things I want to say. Someone asked the question that what is fund of funds, right? So I just wanted to quickly answer that for the person. So a fund of funds, it's literally from a hierarchy for perspective, I'll just simplify it as much as possible. It's when an LP or a limited partner, right, has resources that they're giving to a founder. So it's what I do. So I go to potentially a fund of funds to finance me, then I take that money to finance founders, right? So that's sort of from a hierarchy perspective. So if you're a founder, you wouldn't be talking to a fund of funds. You'll be talking to a GP like me. You'll be talking to a venture capital or a pre-seed investor or an angel. And then those people get their money at a higher hierarchy from what might be called a fund of funds. So that's sort of an easy way to look at it. So they could be institutional funds or funds, they could be family offices and stuff, but they invest in venture capitals, they invest in private equity, they don't invest directly, typically don't invest directly into founders.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Vicky here has a nice problem to have. She says, I have lots of interests and even commitments, but it's all based on finding a lead first. What is your advice on finding that lead investor? Right, everyone's favorite problem.
I have some stories on that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So to the point just made, so I'm a fund of funds. So my fund invests in other venture funds. To her point, yes, definitely. We look at, and some venture funds like mine, we also have what's called a carve out to invest in founders. But the way we do that is that we do follow-on investments from the investments that our funds invest in. So let's just say Ms. Bell says, I like this firm. I provided capital to her fund. They invest in the C stage. The company invests to the A. I may put money into the A. I have money set aside to do just that. That's typically how fund of funds, or at least ours, we kind of operate. To the question about lead investor, I'll be honest, when I was a founder, I used to think that was the way they copped us out. That was the way that they got rid of the women and people of color by saying, go get a lead investor first. But really what they're doing is trying to mitigate their risk. They're trying to say, who's going to take that risk first? And to be honest, that's part of the game, right? You have to, when you look through Signal for funds, the first thing I look for is who takes lead, right? That's the first check off. And then that's the one I kind of put in this bucket to make sure I contact them, have a good relationship with them. And then you kick off the other one. So my whole point is that fund that you talk to, you should have already known that they won't take a lead, or if they're looking for you, how can you corral that? So that's kind of the first thing when you're doing your research on the fund side. From a standpoint of, the type of investors or how you pitch them, definitely. When I was at the university, I was at University of California. I had more founders who were more science-based, and you're right, they never had a lot of exposure out. And like I said, they wouldn't be the type that would be like tweeting all damn day long. However, they would put research out. They put research papers that I read. That's why I mentioned research gate is the bomb. I did that when I was in my PhD program. But definitely, the whole idea to that is that you speak in the language of the tribe that you're in. Speak in the language of the tribe that you're in. If you're in the tribe of SaaS, you're going to speak SaaS wherever the SaaS investors look at. If you're in the tribe of research-based company, that's the tribe language you're going to speak at, so forth and so on. A book I put in the chat is called Words That Work by a guy named Frank Luntz. It's a political book. It was used against a lot of us during the days of the Republican takeover. But the whole idea about that book is that it talks about utilizing language for power. A lot of times we don't realize that. They just think language is this, language has power. And we see that by the way that we've been able to make movements with language and everything else from a political standpoint. But the same thing can happen with the investment and technology standpoint. You have to understand there are trigger languages that make me say, I want to know more. There are trigger languages that make other investors say the same thing. Find out what those languages are for the industry that you're in. That's
true. Actually, I love that. There are things that you would say that would make someone say, oh my gosh, they're working on some technology that is, or something that is very akin to something that we're very interested in. That's true. I just wanted to add that, with all due respect to Taj and to every investor out there, investors, let me not use the word I was going to use, slow leads and fast followers. Okay.
Yes, sir.
I was going to use another word before lead, but I decided to be nicer. There's slow leads and fast followers, and everything he said is absolutely true. Part of it is to mitigate the risk, right? So the other thing too that I will say is that for a lot of minority and people of color and LGBTQ, I'm sorry, and anyone who is not part of the, white male, Stanford educated, Silicon Valley speaking, or, London, some very specific city kind of person who's sort of on the outside, it's even more difficult. The idea of saying you need to find a lead is also a way of saying, I'm really nervous about investing in you. So what I really advise, and the nice thing is, there are now a number of VCs that have come out and that are really trying to be more inclusive and stuff like that. So going and finding those are very important. So that's one. But at the same time, looking at alternative investments and de-risking yourself is very helpful. Convertible notes are your friend. Debt financing is your friend. Yeah. These are tools that you can use, and also you'll be undiluted. This is most times undiluted capital. Right now, with a convertible note, you're giving people the opportunity in the future to gain equity, but you control that narrative, you control that time frame. And I think Taj had mentioned it before, SBIR. The thing about SBIR is not just one block. SBIR is in every or most government agencies. Department of Army has theirs. National Science Foundation has theirs. NIH has theirs. So depending on what you're working on, there's an SBIR grant that you can potentially leverage. If you're working with a university, there's an STTR grant. And then of course, within those departments, if you're in clean technology, there are clean technology grants. So there's so many grants that are non-diluted capital that you can get access to, move your tech forward, do some really great work, and then investors will flock to you. In fact, one of our most successful acquisitions was because that company had worked with the Department of Army, right? The government was working with the company was providing solutions to the government for end-stage renal disease. Very, very successful. Of course, when investors saw that and saw the government was involved, they wanted a part of it,
yeah.
right? And
it had that stability, right?
So exactly, yeah. So there's strategies you can take depending on what you're saying, again, what you're doing. Again, sectors, afford you different things, right? If you're in the science sector, there's certain paths you'll go. If you're in the arts, there's certain paths to go. But find some of those, pathways that help you become more successful.
Great, yeah. And I see there's a bunch of questions, I think, leading with that, with the alternative ways to raise money. There's a couple of questions on crowdfunding. Obviously the regulations have recently changed. It's gone from, $1 million in a year now to $5 million. How do you see that? One, how does that open up to where, hey, if you're not lucky enough to have friends and family who can contribute, but you do have some access to the community, how do you think this is going to change things for seed investors? Because one thing I think we saw a lot of in 2020 is a lot of people who are doing seed stage checks stop cutting those seed stage checks. How will crowdfunding change that, and the liquidity of crowdfunding, how will it increase, and what is your forecast on that? I'd love to hear from both of you on that.
Sure. I'll take a stab at this. No, shout out to Republic, those my friends over there. I think when COVID hit, there was a lot of investors and founders who were like, oh my God, what do I do? How do I do diligence online? Where crowdfunding was like, if you know Birdman, they were doing the Birdman rub, and they were like, I got this. I know this. We've been doing online diligence since 2012. So I say all that to say, I think crowdfunding has changed how everything is looking, not just for founders, but for funds. You have funds like Backstage by Arlen, fellow Dallasite, who launched on Backstage and raising out on Backstage. You have Gumroad, who did on crowdfunding, right? And you have things like rolling funds that are changing the way that venture is looking. That's the whole reason that I decided to be in a fund of funds, because I wanted to reward and invest in those funds that are doing things differently. There was a fund called NDVC that was a really great fund that looked at things differently, and unfortunately failed. And I think I know the reason why it failed, it did not have LPs to support it. My whole goal is I want to make sure that the next NDVC does not fail, because I think it did a great thing for the community. And I think from a venture standpoint, if I was a founder going back again, I probably would try crowdfunding for two reasons: not just to raise money, but also to test my product out, right? To test the market, to see if I'm really truly building something that people actually want, And there are several ways. You can either do the equity crowdfunding, like I mentioned with Republic and others, or the traditional reward-based with Indiegogo and all that good stuff. But I definitely look at it as a way to test your mettle, to test your market, to see if what you're building makes sense before you spend all this money on an MVP. So that's one way to use it. The other thing I would add too is that, in addition to that, we've seen the rise of before Shark Tank has been around for a long time, and we've seen the rise of other shows like The Profit on CNBC, and there's some others on the Discovery Channel that's about funds and startups and businesses and what have you. And I think you're going to see more. We put a company called Spark Charge that was at Lacey on Shark Tank this past opening season. And we did it, to be honest with you, just for exposure. We want the public to be around it, so that way when if we did decide to do a crowdfunding, they already knew, and they're like, hey, that's the company from a Shark Tank. But they ended up getting $1 million from Mark Cuban, so we kind of took a different direction. But that's kind of how I look at it when you're thinking about things like Reg CF or crowdfunding.
Totally. I can say one of the reasons that we are on WeFunder is also because I think it also gives access to underrepresented investors as well. And I think one thing about, founders, I think they've also got to do the work, right? So one of the key things I think that you see in this world is often it's really easy to take the money from the rich, white, cisgendered male VC because they have it and it's there, right? Versus the extra effort that it takes to do some of these other things. So crowdfunding definitely does take more effort, but I do definitely think that there's going to be a lot of benefits to the real world as well, as more and more companies see that as opportunities in the beginning. So I'm glad to hear that you guys both thought it was a great idea for early stage companies too, going through it myself. And then we have another one here on the thoughts on the safe note with a discount compared to other deal structures. This one comes in is like, do you see it as a benefit, or should people really be looking to do price rounds right away? What are your thoughts on those? Yeah, Ngozi, you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is, what are your thoughts on a safe note with a discount compared to some other deal structure? I would assume they mean a price round by that.
Okay. On a seized note. You mean on a convertible note? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, basically the safe is the convertible. The safe, I assume they're talking about the YC safe, which is like the KISS version from 500 or whatever.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm a proponent for convertible notes in every way because for me it's mostly because of the option that it gives you, right? It gives you the ability to decide on some time frame, on some horizon, that somebody can convert it into equity, right? That in itself allows you to retain the value for your company. And I think that that's the way, that's the best way to look at it as a tool, right? Is that it allows you to retain the value for your company. And then also you have complete control on who you invite to be part of that, um, convertible note, right? It's not something that you necessarily are putting out. You're
Right.
going out and you're soliciting the people that you want to work on. So I'm a proponent for it in every way. In fact, when I invest on my own, um, it, I make sure that I invest a lot of times in a convertible notes, right? One, because also on a short-term basis, it gives me some kind of a return investment. If I find out that at some point I'm no longer interested in the company, I can, get my return. Maybe it's a 6% return. I'll get my money, I'll get out, I'll be able to put it into something else. So I think when you think about that from yourself as a founder, and then think of yourself if you were in the same boat as an investor, then that flexibility to me is extremely attractive. So that's my general, in fact, to a lot of founders, I normally suggest that, look, this might be a place for you to start before you come to us, right? It gives you a vehicle to be able to get some money in, do some of the work you need to do before you come back and look for maybe a seed investment from us.
Yeah, and I've also found that utilizing the safe has actually helped you close some of those commitments before the lead comes in and prices, because it's a promise of future equity, right?
Yeah.
And so you can say, listen, I don't know the price. We might do it all at this point and get a price round, but we don't want to wait for the lead to get started on things like hiring the team or funding specific goals in the research and development. And you can be a part of that now, and you'll get whatever the lead says when they show up, right?
Oh,
And
yeah,
that
yeah.
has been very helpful for us, specifically here at Kyndoo, I know, and I'm sure for some of the other founders as well. It looks like we have about 5 minutes left here. So maybe one last question that we can wrap up. And basically this question here is from Mark. Mark says, hey, what are some recommendations on selecting co-founders aside from complementing one's own skill set? I'll add a little bit to that question for like the VC relationship building. How is it that you guys like to interact with co-founders? You generally specifically look to just build that relationship with the CEO, or how are you building it with the other folks in the C-level founder seat as well?
So you want me to start? Or you want to start?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh yeah. To me, relationship is everything. It's the same. The same thing happens with a VC that goes to a fund of funds, for example, or to an institutional investor to raise money. The first thing everyone is trying to see is these people that came together, what kind of chemistry do they have? What kind of, what is the underlying strategy behind their coming together? I've encountered founders where, they sort of just came together because they needed to round out their team, right? And when they come before you, you can see that there's a disconnect. Sometimes I've actually been in a meeting where one founder is annoyed with the other one because they felt like they have the better information and you're interjecting in the wrong side. And it's just really, it's almost comical to watch. So there is no company, there is no business that's built by one person. There
Right.
is no super smart enigma that makes a whole company run. It really requires a whole team of people, a set of tools, a set of structures to be successful. So in the same way, I want founders to reflect the same thing, a mutual respect, defined roles, and a true understanding that they win together, right? Whether they win that particular engagement or not, understanding that what they're doing is to some extent bigger than the conversation they're having with me. I love to see that. I like to see that when Kelly and Jane are working on this, if they walk away from there, they're walking away together because they came in there together. Now, if it so happens that, you know, both of you find that there's no synergy, there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's something you discover. Hopefully you discover it before you come
Yeah.
to pitch. But to me, that relational outcome matters a lot. And also, you know, making sure that you have defined roles that are complementary, that are helpful, and each person is a big piece of making that function work. So.
Great advice.
Absolutely.
Taj?
Yeah, and if I add, you know, I know we ended up on time. I'm always about action items when I leave. So if you're in LA 2050 apps are open. Apply for that money. Number two, if you're eligible for the PPP, Biden just extended it from March 31st to May. Now, to the question about the co-founders, you know, when I got married, my wife and I went to couples counseling the first year we got married. Not because we had issues, but we wanted to see other issues other folks were having so we can avoid it. That's the same idea when I'm looking at founders. What I'm thinking about is like, all right, you know, what's the power dynamic here? Is it a situation where I'm gonna lose my money because they're gonna have a divorce?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that the key to that is, like I said, and that's not even about co-founders. That's also about investors, right? So you want to make sure you're having the right partner when you're doing it. The same tools and the same type of intuition and the same type of strategy you take to find a romantic partner. It's even 10 times when you're finding an investment partner and a business partner, because you're going to spend probably more time with them than you would your own spouse, right? And so I think at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that there's alignment. Two things I always say: transparency, transparency, and transparency. Make sure you're transparent with your partner, so that way when you come to the meeting with us, there isn't that friction or tension or somebody saying, hey, you should have said this. I already had it done before you got there. So that's what I would say when it comes to partners and co-founders.
Great advice. Excellent. Well, hey, thanks both of you for hanging out with us today and helping the StartOut community, just get better in terms of how we would approach and making our relationships with VCs better. I really enjoyed getting to know both of you, and I promise to keep stalking both of you for introductions to folks that make sense for me. But I want to thank everyone in the audience who joined us today. StartOut, thank you for the sponsorship and helping us on this platform. And remember, folks, you want to get involved with StartOut. It's pretty simple. StartOut.org. There's a button to join, to donate, to join all these other great content sessions that we have here to help you out. So thanks, everyone. And hopefully you guys got as much out of this session as I sure did. So thanks a lot, folks. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.